In the days of the temple, the Kohanim, the priests, were the servants, the rabbis, the teachers of the Jewish people. They had no agricultural land. They could not support themselves. And therefore Hashem provided for them. And He gave them no less than 24 gifts, some of which could be consumed in the land of Israel, some in the city of Jerusalem, and others only in the holy temple. And many of these gifts are mentioned at the end of our parasha, Parshat Korach. The reason being is that Korach, a relative of Moshe, rose up in rebellion against his cousin, specifically about the issue of the appointment of Aharon as the Kohen Gadol. And after the rebellion had been put down, Hashem came to Aaron and He says, I promise you that I will give you greatness. I will give you reward. And you and your seed, your descendants, will receive these gifts. And then it goes on to itemize them. For example, the truma. This was the first part of the grain, the oil, or the wine that a farmer was required to take and to give to a kohen. The challah, the first portion of dough. When a Jew would bake some dough in the times of Eretz Yisrael, in the times of the temple, they were required to take that dough and to give it to the kohen. And there were many other gifts. There was the bikurim, the first fruits that a farmer would bring and give to a kohen, and many other gifts besides. And about all of these gifts, the Torah is very specific that it has to be kol chelev laHashem, the very best, the first fruits, the best quality, not a second-grade quality. So, for example, you have the bikurim, the first fruits. The Talmud describes how the farmers would bring their bikurim up to the Beit HaMikdash, up to the temple. They wouldn't bring it in some small, old container. They would have a beautiful container. And depending on how wealthy they were, the more beautiful the container would be. They would put the fruit on the back of oxen. They would decorate the oxen. There would be a whole procession up to the city of Jerusalem. They would make sure that the mitzvah was as beautiful as possible. And the Mesilat Yesharim, the book that describes the guide to piety, tells us that this is one of the most important ways and most important aspects of honoring Hashem, to do a mitzvah in the very best way possible. When you are bringing a gift, as it were, to Hashem, make sure it's the very best gift. When you are performing a mitzvah, do it in the best way possible. And this, in fact, is learned from the Jewish people when they crossed the Red Sea. They had an incredible prophetic vision of God. It was as if the heavens split. And at that moment they said, Ze keli va'anvehu. This is my God, and I want to bring Him honor. I want to bring Him splendor. And says the Talmud, how do you bring splendor to God? God is completely without body. He doesn't need anything from us. So how can you bring Him splendor? Says the Talmud, make sure that the mitzvot that you do are done in the most splendid and beautiful way possible. Lulav na'eh. If you're going to buy a lulav, you can get a second-grade one. You can do a basic mitzvah, but you can also get the most beautiful one. Tefillin na'eh. If you're going to have a pair of tefillin, don't get a substandard pair of tefillin, get a good pair of tefillin. Sefer Torah na'ah. If you're going to buy a Sefer Torah or donate it to a shul, make sure that it's the most beautiful one possible. And this was something that the prophet Malachi scolded the Jewish people for in his time, in the times of the temple. He said to them, how is it that when you come to the temple, you bring second-rate offerings, blind animals, lame animals? And he said to them as follows, Hakriveuna lefechatecha? Would you bring such a gift to a leader of flesh and blood? Let's say that you were summoned to see the prime minister, the king, and you had to bring a gift. What type of gift would you bring? Certainly it would be a first-rate gift, the most exclusive gift. He says, and therefore, why don't you serve Hashem in that way? When you come to bring offerings, sacrifices, that's what you should bring. And the Mesilat Yesharim tells us that this is a very important aspect, and that this aspect, if not properly kept, can lead to a great deal of trouble. And he has a fascinating proof. The proof is from Cain and Abel, the very first murder in all of human history. What was the background? Abel brought an offering to God. And what did he bring? He brought from the best of his flock, of his sheep, the very best animals. Then Cain came and he brought from his particular bounty. He was a farmer, but he brought second-rate stuff. He brought a little bit of flax and he put it on the altar. It was second-rate. God listened and showed favor to the offering of Hevel, but not to the offering of Cain. And because of that, jealousy ensued and ultimately the first murder. Why? Because Cain was not prepared to give of his best to Hashem. Today, Jewish people live in a world of affluence. Perhaps we have never been as affluent as we are currently. If you look back at all of the eras of the Jewish people, specifically going back to Eastern Europe, where there was incredible poverty amongst Jewish people. And yet you saw there in those days in Poland that when a Jew did a mitzvah, he or she tried to do it in the best way possible. I have a book in my home, A Vanished World by Roman Vizniak, incredible photographs that were taken at the time of World War II, just as the Jewish world in Europe was coming to an end. And you see families living literally in hovels, terrible places. And yet there on the windowsill are 2 silver candlesticks for Shabbat. How did a family like that manage to put together money to buy silver candlesticks? But they did it. They made that effort because the mitzvah was important to them. That's what they tried to do. Yet today we live in a world of such incredible affluence, and we Jews are so affluent, and yet when it comes to mitzvah, second rate. A person can be driving a Porsche, and yet the tefillin that they're putting on are the tiny little tefillin that they inherited from their great-grandfather that haven't been kosher for years. It doesn't make sense. The prophet tells us, is that the way that you would serve a human leader? Absolutely not. So when it comes to serving Hashem, remember, hidur mitzvah, to beautify mitzvot. This is my God, and I shall beautify him. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.